This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Have you ever noticed that your morning latte is costing more lately? Before the pandemic, the average cup of coffee in Australia was around $4. Fast forward to 2025, and many of us are now paying about $5.50 for a flat white. But it doesn't stop there. Some experts are projecting that prices could climb as high as $10 by the end of the year, and that's not even counting specialty milks or weekend surcharges. Now, before we start pulling our hair out, it's important to understand the reasons why coffee prices are rising so rapidly. In this episode, we'll explore what's really driving up the cost of your coffee. We'll break down the mysterious C price, look at how coffee prices have shifted over the last few years, and unpack what's currently happening in the global coffee market. We'll also discuss the environmental and political forces impacting price, take a look at where the market is headed, and ask the big question: what should we really be paying for a cup of joe? Here to help today is expert Ollie Brown. Ollie is the Sales and Relations Manager for Condesa Co.Lab, a specialty coffee supplier that sources premium green coffee for roasters around Australia. Welcome, Oliver.
Welcome, Ollie.
Thanks, guys.
Don't go anywhere. We're going to have a quick word from one of our sponsors, Apax Lab. Elevate your coffee experience with Apax Lab mineral concentrates. Apax Lab's precision-engineered formulas, including tonic, jam, and lilac, are designed to enhance the coffee's natural flavors. Not going to change it, it's just going to enhance it. It's going to bring out the vibrant acidity, the rich sweetness, or if you use lilac, it might bring out those delicate floral notes that you've been looking for. Trusted by world-class cafes and even barista champions, Apax Lab helps you unlock your coffee's full potential. Discover more at apaxlab.com. Wait, where was that again, Sonam?
The internet.
Oh, okay. Thought he was going to say the website. Thanks. Today's episode is brought to you by our amazing sponsors at Eco Barista. The reason I sound like this is because they got massages at our stand at Mice, and so I'm getting a massage while recording this message for you. They're the best sponsor of the pod that we could have had. They have the best eco products. This probably sounds really pornographic, but it's not. I'm just getting a massage. They have the best eco-friendly coffee products. They got coffee bags that you can design yourself. They got cups. They got iced coffee cups. They got everything you need. So make sure to support them because they support us. Head to ecobarista.com.au and get 15% off your first purchase when you sign up. Oh, mama, that's good.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. Where does this podcast find you?
It finds me in Adelaide.
Oh, nice. Where in Adelaide are you?
Yeah. I'm in West Beach.
Oh, beautiful.
So, yeah.
Mate, amazing playgrounds. I've heard there's an amazing skate park there. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's nothing you can't do down in Adelaide.
Yeah.
It's got everything.
Yeah, got sharks.
Yeah, many sharks. I've heard
lots
that.
of those. A bit bitey.
And as we do in all of our podcasts, Ollie, I'm Liam Conroy.
I'm Sonam Sherpa. Yeah.
And if you could do this with us,
It's just coffee.
It's just coffee.
That's it.
All right. Let's just start with first, Oliver. What's your coffee order?
I'm a bit of a purist. I like the filter.
Oh, nice.
I like it black. And I think if I'm going for a filter, I'm probably going Ethiopian. And probably natural.
Yeah, nice. And what's your favorite filtering mechanism? An AeroPress, a V60?
Ooh. Oh, actually, the Tricolate is my fave.
Oh, fair enough.
I don't know if you've ever seen the Tricolate,
No,
but
I have. Yep. Congrats.
Super easy, but thank you. Bomb-proof. Even someone not fully concentrating on what he's doing early in the morning can manage a good brew with it. So
that's what you want. You want full
That's
proof.
Exactly.
So today's episode is going to be a lesson for Liam and I in macroeconomics, especially pertaining to the C price and the C market. So for all of you listening, we are absolute chumps. We're new to this. We have a relative idea. We get the emails from, different people, different suppliers, different green importers telling us what's happening. We also read the news. We see what's happening with the C prices. We see the volatility. We understand that the dollar's impacting it. We understand there's logistics, there's environmental impacts as well. But what we really need to know is the whole story, everything that is large. So this is an introductory episode that's going to help us understand just top line. And then from here on out, I think we can explore and go into greater depth on a lot of these topics inside of the whole of what's impacting the C price and the C market in general. So, Ollie, I know this is going to be really hard, but let's just first start with, what do you know about the C market? And before we do that, what's your role at Condesa, and, what's your career in coffee so far? Just so that we can, pull out the credentials and be like, look, we can trust this guy.
You can trust me. That's what they all say. So my role is sales manager. I was invited to join a very young Condesa in 2014, late 2014, and then actually sort of emigrated with the whole family across in 2015. And I was asked to sort of basically build Condesa's specialty position. And I did that, and I'm now the sales manager here at Condesa. I think we're one of the biggest specialty importers in Australia. It's noteworthy that we are the sales office of Ecom. Ecom is one of the biggest importer-exporters of coffee in the globe. So, whilst we are, a nimble independent company, our parent company, has some huge credentials, and we're able to sort of leverage some of that as well and take some of that knowledge and that experience. And that's where most of my day-to-day knowledge comes from a trade perspective from Ecom. In terms of where I started coffee, I've always been a bit of a coffee geek myself. When I was a kid, back 12, I think it was, my dad used to be up at Borough Market at the weekends. So he had a stall on Borough Market in London. And I used to go up with him every single weekend to be his little sales, his pulling. He's got little kids selling his products. So I used to go up with him every weekend. And across from where we were was Monmouth Coffee. And I thought Monmouth Coffee and everyone working at Monmouth Coffee was like amazing. I imagined them bringing, every single one of them bringing, traveling over the world and bringing the coffee in, and I wanted to be just like them. So that was kind of my light bulb moment with coffee. And then it's something I've kind of always been fascinated in. I was a estate agent in London, worked for some of the biggest estate agents. And then I sort of had a bit of an epiphany, and actually thanks to my old man, he helped me sort of transition into a coffee industry role. And I really was fascinated specifically with supply side. I know less so barista, more roasting, more green supply. And I found a company called Macanta in London, a green importer, and I wanted to go and work with them, and was very lucky to get a role in their sort of lab. In their lab, I think I started doing sample roasting, and then sort of from there, moved up to lab manager, and then started working for a big roaster in London called Union, then Australia. So
And so what took you to Adelaide then?
Yeah, I mean Adelaide's where my mum's Aussie, that's where all the family are. And when I started sort of doing Condesa Co.Lab, which was a specialty arm of Condesa, when I started that, we sort of gained a lot of traction on the East Coast, but I think it was always hard to sort of gain that same traction in South Australia, in WA, and there's very much the sense of unless you're here, you're never gonna gain that confidence. So we made a decision. The team's incredible. The team is still doing their thing on the East Coast, and I'm sort of building up a market here in SA, and also responsible for WA as well.
That's great.
Man, all over.
Yeah, so you've got quite a storied history of coffee. Borough Markets, what a place to cut your teeth. And I know that Monmouth shop, that's beautiful.
Legacy.
It's an absolute spot. Yeah. And you must have had a very fun childhood.
It was. What you saw in those markets was amazing. I loved it.
Yeah, it's a great way to educate yourself as well. And I think that probably helped you realize quickly that supply is greater than the whole of everything that's there, because without the supply, you don't get that market.
Totally.
Starting you real young, sales all the way back then,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was so fun. I remember like that thing of like, the way to get someone to come to your stall, and that's not a skill everyone can pick up. So
These are the small things.
Totally.
Well, I mean, I think that's a pretty good understanding that Ollie's got the credentials to be able to tell us what's going on. So, hey, Ollie, could you give us an overview of the current situation with green coffee globally? I know there's a lot of factors, but let's stay top line because we've only got an hour today. But yeah, we'll let you go for it.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Look, ultimately, it's got to stay top line. I mean, the industry is so vast. There are so many actors and players. If we wanted to get into the nitty-gritty, we would be here forever. So, I mean, this really can only be top line. And I think the other point is that, if we get incredibly technical, then we're going to confuse the majority of people that are listening, and go places where, almost going too deep. So it definitely will be top line. And also, I'll make the caveat that whilst I'm a professional and I am a coffee trader, I am not the specialist within our team. And we have specialists that are, not just in Condesa, but in ecom, that, they just look at the weather and the weather's impact on coffee. Just look at the technical perspective and the technical's impact on coffee. There are so many different layers. Let's call me the overview, level 1 and 2, but you can go deeper and deeper. It's such a technical
So this is
concept.
Yeah, so this is episode 1 of Introduction to C Price. We might even be like C Price for Dummies. And you know what? And that's where Liam and I are at. So let's help us out. So what does it mean right now when everybody's talking about how unstable the market is?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so right now, the market's never been this volatile. So what do I mean by volatile? The price keeps going up and down, huge movements each day. So currently we're at 379 for the C market price today. But yesterday or 3 days ago, it was 330, for example. So in a short amount of time, it's come up in price. And that is having an impact further down the line because, of course, you're not paying today's price. You're paying the price that you paid when the coffee got on the boat, essentially. So you're almost like 3 months behind in price as a regular customer at a coffee shop. So, it has been going up and down very quickly within a day. We're in a situation where supply and demand, there is more demand than there currently is supply at the moment, which is what is causing this high price. And I think, it's also a case of where the coffee's at. A lot of the coffee that has been produced isn't necessarily in the consuming countries. A lot of that coffee is either on a boat or it's still in the producing country. It's not where it needs to be. And therefore, that is driving at the consuming countries. That's driving the price of coffee up because roasters are just, I need coffee now. I must roast. I will pay anything to get the product. So that's sort of partly why you're having this very volatile price. But then you also have people that are unrelated to coffee looking at the coffee market and going, I can take advantage of this too. I'm going to see if I can make some profit off coffee in my own different way. And they are also having an impact on the price of coffee. So it's very complex. There are a huge amount of moving parts and pieces in this, whole picture. And again, no one person has all the answers.
No, not at all. And I think we're gonna dive into a bit more of the instability that's affecting the supply chain from farmers to roasters, and also how it's affecting the coffee industry as a whole. But I think while we're on the C price, it's probably good for us to just get an understanding of what the C price actually is. I know you were just saying it's about buying futures, and that's where those external people that come in that are actually market traders come in. So could you give us a better understanding of that as well?
Yeah, so I mean that's almost reverse. So what is the C price? The C price is it's the price of coffee traded on the ICE, which is a mechanism that I guess evolved alongside the need of millions of bags of coffee being sold and the need for millions of bags of coffee needing to be bought by large entities, small entities, medium-sized entities. And it's a mechanism that's kind of grown up alongside that need. So it didn't sort of come into, poof, one day, here it was. It's sort of a trade mechanism that's had to evolve to fulfill, huge demand from some of these global entities, supermarkets needing hundreds of thousands of bags of coffee. And similarly, when you look at the size of Brazil, which is the largest exporter of coffee in the world, they're exporting, millions of bags of coffee each year. How can those things come together? And that's where the commodity market has come about to manage that flow of coffee exchange. And yes, futures is a big part of that. And again, we can maybe sort of dig into what a future is on the coffee side.
And when you say and like that price, so you were saying before there's a volatile, that number 3.5 or 3.75, what is that actually unit of like measurement? Is that like, how you're saying this number is actually to represent millions and billions and things to buy?
Yeah. So it's US cents per pound for a contract of coffee. One contract of coffee is 17.2 metric ton of coffee. One contract. So you can imagine that's going to be quite a lot of money. And there are thousands and thousands of those contracts being bought and sold at any one time. The C market almost acts as an insurance in a way for companies to protect themselves when selling physical. The commodity market is in a way a paper trading mechanism. It's like you are buying the physical coffee, but people don't often hold that physical coffee. They just hold the contract for it. So we'll call that a paper contract. And they use that as a means to protect themselves from the physical sale of a coffee. So that they're what's known as balanced. What you don't want to do is sell coffee at a very high price, and then the off it goes. The coffee's being sold, but the commodity market goes down and down and down and down, and by the time it's all sold, actually the price is very low, and you've lost the difference in that price. The way to protect yourself is getting a contract, futures, so that you're always balanced. So if I sell a contract, I buy a contract. If I buy a contract, I sell physical. So we always balance that out.
I think that segues directly into a question I already had, which was, is the C price an accurate representation of the value of coffee, or is that just more of an existential question in general?
I think, that is it's whatever price people are willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
Whether or not it is the fair representation is not a question for me, really. What should be a fair price is the cost of, it should cover the cost of production and some profit, you would think, for the producer. That perhaps is the way to look at it. But the reality is that's not the case. For a very long time, the futures price was way below the cost of production. It was like 90 cents. Producers were losing money hand over fist. And in fact, coffee was just a sort of a side hustle to their main product, soy, wheat, sugarcane, whatever. And now, yes, they are, the current market price, they're definitely making a profit, but that profit is probably, going into covering all the debt from when they were, when they were trading coffee at a loss. So, it's a very difficult question to say, is it a fair price? It's a price that the market is currently demanding for coffee right now. And unfortunately, we have to live with that price as it is.
As you touched on with the farmers there, I'm not saying they're raking it in and they're getting their bag or anything like that, but is it affecting farmers in a positive way, the seed price at the moment, or is the volatility still a really, really big impactor in how you can actually plan? And
absolutely. I mean, it's making it very challenging. Yes, it will be impacting farmers in a positive way because the price is good. But also due to the global dynamics, the cost of their inputs is very high. It's probably higher than it's ever been. The cost of the fuels, cost of their fertilizers, all of that is going to be very, very high. So whilst they're making profit on the coffee, a lot of that will probably be eroded just in managing the farm, paying for pickers, doing all of that. So it's a very black and white view to say, the price is high, they're making money. Well, it's never quite like that. They've got a lot of challenges that they're facing as well. And they've got to cover that off through these market dynamics.
And I imagine I imagine that the environment plays a big factor in maybe reduced yields as well. We were going to cover the environment next, so it's probably a good time to look at it. And so how are the major the environmental forces impacting coffee production around the world, and what are they doing to coffee yields around the world at the moment?
Ultimately, the band at which coffee is being grown is ultimately being eroded over time through environmental impacts. Not necessarily just climate, people cutting down forests, people, just the way in which coffee is growing, lack of rain or rain coming out of season, El Nino, all of those are having an impact on how coffee is growing. One example for, at the moment is traditionally Brazil during their, just to pre-flowering, would have a really nice rain period. The moisture levels of soil would be really high, and it would mean throughout the crop as the flowers turned to cherry, that would have a traditionally really good impact. In the last 4 or 5 years, that's not been so straightforward. Rains have been late. Moisture levels of the soil have been low. The flowers haven't developed into cherries as we would hope. And therefore, that's having an impact on how much coffee is available to the roasters, available to the consumers. We're currently, at the moment, living in a period of deficit in coffee supply. So more people are consuming it than is being grown and delivered to the market. So that's partly this supply and demand reason. That's partly why the coffee is so expensive. But also, in a positive way, these warmer temperatures allowing coffee to be grown at high altitudes. So that's a little bit of a gain. In a negative way, often that means moving coffee production up into areas that would have traditionally been forest, which is why the EUDR have been putting rules around, look, you've got to supply coffee that's from a non-forest area. You've got to prove that, and you've got to explain where your coffee's come from. So again, that's having an impact on the price of coffee, because it means that, particularly with the EUDR, it means that perhaps traditional markets are not available to everyone, and that's changing people's confidence around where they can sell their coffee. And again, that causes the price to go higher.
And we can't talk environment without talking sustainability. And I think a lot of naivety is surrounded with sustainability. Everyone thinks it has to be on the farmers. Yeah, it's always the farmers. You have to fix it. You have to do everything better to be more sustainable. Logistics is not sustainable.
Absolutely.
Like, there's all these different things that impact the environment. That's me being very reductive and me trying to stand up for the farmers here. But is there a shift towards more sustainable farming practices? And then also after that, it's just like, what other things that can companies like yourself do, can logistics companies do? How can we as a wholesale change make it more sustainable for that coffee supply and demand?
Oh, that's a big question, that is. Let's start with our farmers trying to be sustainable. So certainly from e-commerce perspective, yes, we have what's known as an SMS system, Sustainable Management Services, which is a network of agronomists supporting people on the ground to empower producers to be sustainable as they possibly can. Ecom has a system like that. Our competitors all have systems designed in a similar way to try and empower, give knowledge to, help farmers understand whether they're making money or not, help them understand, what they can do to, save, but also save money, but also save the environment that they're working in, and make sure, they are, cross farming. They might do bananas, they might do, shade trees for wood, for, all sorts of things like that. So absolutely, I think farmers very much are switched on to being sustainable, thinking sustainably, and they, after all, are often the ones living with the direct impact of global warming. It's often they're the canary in the coal mine. They're seeing that. So yeah, I think they are. I think probably consuming side, production side is probably where there's less sustainability. Shipping side is a massive area of most of our coffee, for example, in Australia comes from Brazil, Central, South America. It's coming on a boat across the globe, that's pumping out, fuel, and that's these shipping lines are often not connected to any one entity. They're a third party. We have no say in the amount of fuel used or the way in which that coffee is shipped, but that is the primary way that coffee is moved across the globe, and that is, at the moment, there's not a huge amount of regulation about the sustainability of how our coffee is moved. I do think, though, in consuming countries, more and more countries are starting to think about their carbon footprint. They are starting to think about, mainly partly because gas is so expensive, or are there alternatives? Can I have an electric roaster? And you are starting to see more roasters coming into Australia, and around the world, which are electric as well. I don't think there's a company out there that doesn't have a form of electric. Even Probat's getting on it. Gießen, Stronghold, Rust, they're all electric, and I think that's kind of a move that we're seeing, which is sort of feeding into people's need and want to see sustainable coffee. But I definitely think that we probably need to all look at ourselves as consumers and actually think about that. How sustainable is my cup of coffee, and should I be, actively, working towards at least buying from a more sustainable source. So yeah.
I can't believe we're still having this conversation in 2025, when we probably started having this conversation 20 years ago, and we still can't figure it out. It's just ridiculous how people just still go for convenience over anything else.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and going on the consumer, which is us, and you're saying, you touched on it briefly before about the surge in global coffee demand. Why is it skyrocketing so much across the world? Is it accessibility? What is it, and where are you seeing it? The increase coming from? Which markets?
Yeah, good question. Look, just in its traditional markets, the biggest being US and Europe, more people are drinking coffee. That's one obvious one. The demand is increasing there, but also we're seeing increased demand in markets that are less traditional. More people are starting to drink coffee in China. Lots of people are drinking coffee in Eastern Europe. Lots of people are drinking coffee in Russia, and in markets that traditionally aren't coffee markets. We're seeing that. I know you guys were in the UAE, Coffee World Dubai, and Saudi Arabia. They're coming on and consuming coffee. India is a huge market that's only just started to scratch the surface. Tiny market, but when you think of the population being 1.4 billion people, that's an absolutely vast amount of people that are just starting to drink coffee. Imagine if that market explodes. And like I said, touching on China, same thing. Very small amount of people drinking, really, in the scheme of things in China, drinking coffee, but that's an awful lot of people. Even if it's only 1%, that's hundreds of thousands of people drinking coffee, which will have this impact on demand. And whilst, yes, China are producing coffee, and, some pretty decent coffee, it's no way able to fulfill that shortfall between the supply and the demand.
No way. No, that's impossible.
So, yeah.
So are you noticing it's more an uptake in specialty coffee, or is it commodity coffee, or is it both?
The old question of what is specialty. If we're going SCA, specialty, it's anything 80 and above. Again, for me, I'd say specialty coffee, and this is only my personal opinion, but I would say it's like anything really 86 and above. In my opinion, that's where specialty sits. But the market considers specialty between 80 and up. And definitely, yes, that is where the vast majority of coffee is being consumed. It's the 80s to the 84s probably, and that's coming in container loads. And sorry, the origins that probably fulfill those major volumes of Brazil, Honduras, Ethiopia, Vietnam. Those coffees sort of probably sit in that space, and most coffee traded around the globe is coming from those areas.
I know this is a little bit conspiracy theorist, but do you think the rise of espresso as well across the world and people drinking triple shots, ventis, all those sort of things, you could be using anywhere up to 40 grams of espresso in one drink. Is that also contributing to the more consumption because people are actually just consuming more coffee per beverage?
Yeah, I mean, I've not really thought about that, but yes, possibly. If we're seeing people, per shot, they want, and I think a lot of consumers, yes, there are those of us that are probably listening to this podcast and some who aren't, that are, super focused on quality. But probably the vast amount of coffee drinkers are not focused on quality and they want a caffeine hit. So, yeah, they are, using coffees that may have a higher caffeine content. They just want to have that buzz. They want that, they want a hit. They want to feel like they've had a coffee in the morning. And yeah, I think more and more people are drinking coffee for that probably than they are for the pleasure of it. And I think, that perhaps is having an impact on demand. But the biggest thing having that, impact on price is just the fact that there's not enough coffee currently being grown. And one of the things we've traditionally seen in this boom and bust times, when there is a deficit, traditionally in the past, you would have seen lots of people starting their own farms, buying land, growing coffee, and then that would then, over time, 4 or 5 years later, that would sort of bring the coffee price down. What's interesting in this era is that there is less space to be growing coffee, or the cost of land is too high and prohibitive for, small farmers to just buy land. It's not available just to buy. The cost of setting that farm up is very, very expensive. If you look at Costa Rica, for example, traditionally the main or big growing belts was around the city, but actually that land is way more valuable as land to grow, to build on, and so you're seeing what was traditionally coffee farms turning into development. Same in Kenya. One of my favorite origins as well. The amount of development that's happening on traditional coffee areas is having an impact on people's ability. They just can't buy the land because it's so expensive. So that boom and bust isn't necessarily as obvious as it has been in the past.
And you referred to the deficit, and when we talk about supply and demand, the deficit is probably the key performance indicator there. What is the current deficit?
Yeah, so we're expecting a deficit in 25, 26. Current deficit is 500,000, so not a huge one. But next year we're expecting almost 2 million bags. So that's a big deficit. So the current price, we're quite high at the moment. There isn't a huge amount of factors that are going to cause that price to come down if there's still a deficit. We can't just magic 2 million bags out of the air. So this is the crux of the challenge. And then, of course, if you are a trader, if you're a commodity market trader, if you're in it not for the coffee need, but you're in it to make profit because there are people doing that, that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity to take what's known as a position on the market. You may buy a lot of contracts knowing that the value of those contracts will go up over the next year. And that's what we've seen in the past, I don't know, year or so. Those levels are very, very high of people that are just taking a position. And they're not necessarily coffee people. They're, funds that are looking to make money out of this supply and demand difference. So yeah,
the sharks is what you're saying.
No, because they, again, it's market dynamics. Whether I like it or not, if there's an opportunity, people will fill that, fill the gap. If there's a gap seen, they'll want to fill it. Who am I to say, oh, you can't take advantage of that opportunity? Yes, it is making incredibly difficult for producers and consumers, but that fact has also made it incredibly good for producers who've had it tough for the last. So again, it's never black and white. Everyone has their part to play.
It's more push and pull than anything else.
Yeah. Those same actors that perhaps are causing the price to rise through taking positions also could be the very same people. In fact, they were the very same people who sold a lot during the news around Trump's tariffs and caused the market to come off. So in that sense, that's a good thing. That allows some roasters to then take a bit more of a position. I think it's very easy to say this group over here is, the bad guys, and this group over here is the good guys. But I think it's just the reality of global supply and demand on a absolutely vast scale. Coffee is being traded. It's the second most traded product behind oil, I think.
Yep.
There's so many factors here. It's wrong of anyone to say, oh, he's a bad guy.
Yeah, fair enough. So let's just hone down a little bit on the supply thing, because I think it's quite important to talk about. The supply coming out of Brazil this year is pretty much the whole world is going to hinge on this. Is that right?
I mean, yeah, in a way, yes. Because why? Because Brazil is the biggest producer of Arabica coffee in the world. Ultimately, that's the fact. If Brazil are producing 65 million bags, everyone's looking. If they only produce 60, that will have an impact. The reality is that, like I said, the Brazil had very dry weather, so it meant that the amount of bags available to come onto the market just wasn't there. We've been talking to farmers all over Brazil, Ecom talked to, Condesa talked to, and you can see that is the case. They just don't have coffee to sell. Ironically, in a time when they would probably be wanting to sell, but they don't necessarily have it, Brazil has a huge impact because just the absolute vast size of production. Some of these farms are so big, you could land a Boeing 747 on the drying beds. You can stand on a hill and look across the distance, and that's all fun. The size is vast, and they're picking, for the most part, using mechanical tractors. On the smaller cases, they use like a strimmer. But it's got little fingers. It's got fingers that vibrate incredibly quickly. They run them up and down trees, a little bit like the way they do with olives. Sort of that similar process. They have something catching it, but most of it's mechanized. So it's huge. So it makes sense that if they have a bumper year, that will impact the supply and demand positively. positively. If they have a bad year, or if there are challenges like COVID, like, trade, trade challenges, or even things like, the cost of, or the price I'm getting in Brazil real versus my US dollar price, if that's particularly good, I'm going to sell. Or actually, hang on a minute, no, I'm not getting many reals for my US dollar. I might not want it to be sold. So things like that all have an impact on the price and the demand that we're seeing onto the global market.
All right. So the farmers, coffee's been harvested, gone to the exporter. It's now being shipped, and logistics is a whole nother factor again. And it's something that we need to touch on because there are some really, really big things impacting the global shipping routes at the moment, particularly in the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal. The Suez Canal is obviously geopolitical. The Panama Canal is due to drought and the lack of fresh water. How's this affecting the coffee supply chain as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, simply, if the coffee's not where it needs to be consumed, you're going to have a problem. And that is the crux of the issue. Most of the coffee is not where it is needing to be consumed, not where it's needing to be roasted. And if there is any factor that causes that supply to slow down, you will end up with a deficit of the consuming country, and therefore that will just automatically cause prices to go up ultimately. And that's kind of what we're seeing here. We are seeing logistic challenges. We are seeing supply slow down. I think that during the season, there have been so many problems. Whether it's been last year that coffee coming down past Ethiopia, coming down around the Horn was getting impacted by the Houthis. As you say, the Suez is an issue. Panama Canal, all of that will mean that it takes a longer time for the coffee to get to origin. To consuming country. So traditionally, in the olden days, you could say a coffee would get from producer to consumer in about 40 to 60 days. Now we're looking at like 70 to 90 days as the average. So that's massive, and that can affect all sorts of things. Even
I guess that would then compromise the actual quality of the product as well.
It certainly has an impact. I mean, when you think that the coffee, that shipping always has an impact on the quality, and in fact, that's probably something we don't talk about enough. That's a whole other podcast. But when you consider that it goes from coffee's dried for exportation down to theoretically 11%, sometimes lower, 10.5, 10, which is relatively dry. It's rare, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't always go in a grain pro bag. Majority of it probably just is standard jute, or maybe it just even sits in a full container. It's blown in all on its own with a liner. That's it. And that sucks up moisture as it goes, through the moist parts of the world. And then, as it goes through the dry parts of the world, it gives that moisture back out again, and then it, might go swing down into the, into the lower latitudes and again suck up moisture. And then by the time it's arrived, it's sucked up, given out. And that has an impact on the cell walls of the beans, which will have an impact on the shelf life of the coffee when it arrives. All of that has
and if we're talking, we're talking about price and why your coffee's going to cost so much. If your coffee's sitting on a container ship for twice the amount of time, it's costing you twice the amount of petrol. It's costing you twice the amount of time to hire the boat. It's costing you extra across all lines here. And so that's another one of the major impacts. It's changing the cost of your coffee.
I mean, even if we're talking about how to combat travel and how to maintain the humidity and that temperature, it's that's an added cost on top.
Absolutely.
That would be insane. Double the price for a humidity controlled, or even freezing them, keeping things cold.
Absolutely.
But how are exporters and distributors adapting to those challenges in particular? Because there's not much you can do about it. They're out of your control. Hopefully things go back to normal and you can start getting coffee in those 40-day turnarounds that you're talking about.
I mean, yeah, how are exporters getting around it? I mean, look, it's almost during the point it's on a boat, the coffee's pretty much out of your hands. I mean, that's the reality is you don't know where it's going to be routed. You don't know whether it's going to necessarily do a stop in China or a stop in Saudi Arabia. You don't know, and you do kind of have to set and forget. But what's the answer to that is not knowing is, again, you need coffee. The roaster needs coffee. The exporter needs coffee to sell to the importer needs coffee to sell to the roaster. So it's about pivoting. It's about being open to different origins and qualities. And I think that's the only way, really, that you can manage that challenge. So, for example, you might be shipping the bulk of your coffee from Brazil, but actually, you might put a couple of containers of Indian, which is closer, or coffee from Papua New Guinea, which is very close, or coffee from China or Vietnam, which are really starting to grow when it comes to producing Arabica. You might put a couple of containers of those qualities on so that you take the risk off the table. I mean, trading's pretty much about risk management, and that's one of the ways to manage that risk of it not arriving when it's supposed to. You can't really turn around to a roaster and go, "Oh, we don't have coffee for you."
I'm gonna now task you with a really, really difficult challenge, and one of the hardest things that impacts everything is the exchange rate between the Australian dollar and the US dollar for us here in Australia when it comes to buying green coffee. Could you give me a very simplistic term that my little brain could understand?
So yeah, I think the relationship between the Aussie dollar and the US dollar is really important to understand. Even if you are a tiny weeny roaster buying flat price coffee, you will still be impacted by the price of the Aussie dollar versus the US dollar. And often the two of them act in juxtaposition because Australia is a commodity-driven economy. And the US dollar is not. They often work in opposites. So if the US dollar goes down, the Aussie dollar goes up. If the Aussie dollar goes down, the US goes up. It's more that in a way the Aussie follows the US. So for example, the Aussie dollar is 0.63 cents against the US dollar. But 2 weeks ago, it dropped down to 0.59. And that doesn't seem a very big change, but that can be as much as 50-cent difference on your price of coffee at the end of the day. And 50 cents again sounds tiny, but when you're timesing 50 cents over, a full container of coffee, that's a huge difference. That's $10,000 different. So that's massive. The more expensive the coffee, the more of a difference that has as well. If it was a container of, Kenyan, for example, which tends to be, I don't know, your average Kenyan coffee, 400 cents per pound there, 450, maybe sometimes even $6.50. Consider that over a coffee that's, $3.70, which is maybe a Brazilian today, something like that. So if you're buying expensive coffee, the impact the Aussie dollar will have, or the relationship between the Aussie dollar and the US dollar will have on your coffee that day is amazing. I mean, it's like, for a coffee shop to understand that, if your price of milk kept going up and down when you were serving your coffee, you need to factor that into the price to the customer. On a daily basis, it was going up and down. And that's exactly what's happening in the coffee industry. We have a quoting system. Literally, we have to refresh it every 30 seconds because that relationship moves all the time. And sometimes that's something that the roasters struggle to get their head around. But I think now more than ever, it's something you've got to be aware of when buying coffee. And it doesn't matter whether you're a big scale or small scale, it is relevant to you, definitely.
That's a really, really, really valuable piece of advice. And it's something that I've taken on very well just then.
I think it really shows, like, most of our listeners are here in Australia. And I think a really easy way to, like, remind that whole dynamic is when you travel. If you go to the US and you go buy a coffee, you literally go to anywhere and buy a coffee. You're like, wait a second, I just bought that. That was $8, $9, where, normally we're spending like, $3.50, $4, $5 for a coffee. And it just is completely, and it's like that on the bigger scale, Yeah.
Terrifying.
100%.
So let's, sorry, so Ollie, let's look into the future a little bit. I'm going to test you here. And all of these opinions are yours. There's no one else. These are not Condesa's opinions. So we just want to ask if you see any sort of trends in the coffee industry that are going to affect price. And then also, do you believe that the coffee price will continue to rise on the back of what you said with that 2 million bag deficit?
Yeah. I mean, yes. Ultimately, I think, look, it's very difficult to answer that question because of the Trump factor. In a way, if Trump wasn't in at the moment, I'd say absolutely the price of coffee was definitely going to keep rising because of the deficit. But because of Trump and the tariffs, that's not so obvious now. We could see things change because, as I've said before, one of the big consumers of coffee is America. One of the big suppliers of coffee is Brazil. If Trump's putting agricultural tariffs at 10%, coffee's an agricultural product, that may have an impact on the price of coffee in America. Consumption will go down. We might not be in a deficit for 26. It's unlikely, but it could happen. So it's less clear now Trump's in and so now he's raising the tariffs and his impact on the geopolitical stage is so big that, you would be a very brave man to say that it definitely was going to be high. But I think, at the level we're at, I think it's at least going to sort of bounce around this, I think probably to the upside. So we may see the price of coffee go back up to $4, 400 cents per pound, in the next 3 to 6 months. I reckon that's entirely possible. And until there's, until we know that Brazilian crop is big, and until we know that the amount of coffee coming out of Brazil is a bumper, that's not really going to change. Yes, Colombia, Central America, Honduras are important, but the pure scale of Brazil just makes it so high. So I do think we're on the upside, personally, and I think that roasters and consumers just have to, find ways to make that work. If you're a roaster, then perhaps changing the style of coffee you're using, being more open to slotting in new origins you've not tried before just because they're going to hit a price point. If you're a coffee shop, is your current model working? Yes, no, look at that. I think, evolve. And I definitely think anyone who's just expecting to do what they've always done and expect it to be okay, that's not going to happen. The industry as a whole, the consuming industry as a whole, has to think differently about coffee. From consumer to coffee shop to roaster to exporter, an importer, and exporter. We've all got a part to play.
So does the $12 flat white make sense then?
In many ways, it does. And I think, $12 Aussie.
12 Australian dollar, yeah.
Yeah, we've got to remember we're paying one of the lowest prices for coffee as a first world consuming country than anywhere else. Because it's the Aussie dollar, remember, against the US dollar, and coffee is always bought in US dollars. We are paying a very low price. I think, is it going to go to 12? Maybe not. Is it going to, go 7, 8? Possibly. But I think as well, in our society, and I saw it when I was in the UK during the GFC, people still wanted their coffee. in the scheme of things, it's a pretty inexpensive luxury. And, I'll cut back on everything else, but I'll still tap and go with my coffee. The other thing is just that simple tap and go. I think a lot of people don't even look at what the price they're paying actually is. I think they literally put their phone or put their watch or their card, off they go. I don't necessarily think people are like, So I think we do need to give the consumer a bit of credit here. I think what coffee shops do need to do is show why it's worth coming to them instead of the guy next door. I think differentiation's gonna be a factor that we see. People will have to start doing something different to the guy next door if you want them to come to your coffee shop and pay the $7, because ultimately the consumer's got all the choice. And if you want to attract their attention, you need to do something different.
So what you're saying is $12 is maybe not the price it's going to go, but it's the price it should go because Australians are amongst the lowest paying consumers in the first world for coffee.
That is correct. I'm not saying it definitely should go to 12, but I definitely think Aussies shouldn't be, closed-minded to the idea they need to pay a little bit more for their coffee, without a shadow of a doubt.
And then we're going to try and crystal ball it even further now. 5 or 10 years from now, what does it look like?
Oh, guys, come on.
Hovercrafts, flying cars.
Okay. Well, I actually think so. Again, the coffee shops are doing it tough at the moment. They are paying probably higher salaries than they've ever paid. They're paying higher rents than they've ever paid. They're paying, or if not now, they will be paying a higher coffee roasted price than they've ever paid. They are really under a lot of pressure to make ends meet. And I think, if that doesn't change, that model will break. And I think, therefore, what we will see probably, when you can come back to me in 10 years' time and say you were wrong or right, but I think automation will be the way to go.
Yep.
There are so many very, very good automatic roasting machines, automatic coffee machines that, that's going to be a way that coffee shops will cut cost, I think. And I have a feeling that you will see the role of the barista who's currently focused behind that machine, pulling shots, not able to connect with the customer. I have a feeling that role will change, where they become more of a coffee sommelier role, or even just community connector role. Because a lot of the time people come to coffee shops and not necessarily to drink a coffee, but just to have community, be chatted to, asked a question to by the barista. And if you're able to increase that connectivity between consumer and barista, that's probably only ever a good thing. So I think automation, the barista's role evolving out from behind the counter, I think we're going to see that happen. And I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think if you're doing some of those things, and also if you're cutting costs around, instead of needing 3 baristas to do what 2 could do, or changing that role, then you can probably spend a bit more on the coffee. And then the quality of the coffee going through those automated machines will improve as well. So everyone wins. You get a better experience, you get a better coffee, you're happier. Who's not going to want to tap and pay on their $11, $12 coffee?
I think,
so I think...
Yeah, and I think what you're saying, Ollie, there as well, is there's a lot of snouts in the trough at the moment, and automation may help alleviate some of that as well.
It makes me feel sick just thinking about how much effort it goes to extra trade routes, there's so many more hands, the dollars going up and down, and then the thought of a barista, come from a barista background, but the waste behind the bar, just even dialing in. And it's like if you're wasting a couple shots, it's like
every cafe in Australia wastes a few shots.
Oh my God.
Yeah, automation will clean that up really quickly.
Absolutely.
Just insane.
Absolutely.
Just insane.
All right. So I understand we're approaching the hour mark. So I'd like to just quickly recap and summarize what we've talked about quickly, just so we can all understand what we've talked about and also where we need to go next in terms of all of us learning a bit more together. And I think this is by far the last time we'll ever speak to you, Ollie. I think we need to deep dive into each one of those segments. So first we talked about the C price and how it is essentially trading futures. It's not the exact value of what coffee is. Coffee is valued on a lot of different things, and there's a lot of external players within that.
Absolutely.
And we talked about the environment. Unfortunately, the farmers are the canaries in the coal mine. They're at the face. They're feeling the impacts of global warming more than anybody. So to put everything on them is just ridiculous. So you as a consumer, you as as an employee or an employer, think about all those little things that can cut, waste or even unnecessary usage of energy, or just, just simplify some certain things. Look at automation and look at the things that we've just spoken about.
Yeah.
And, global coffee demand is surging. It's just what it is. And people want more and more of it, and it's going to increase the price. And I don't know about you, Ollie, but I'm of the opinion that I think it's a good thing that the demand is higher than the supply, purely because I think it's going to drive a cost up, and people will get used to that cost eventually. So even if the supply does come back up, I think people need to be paying that much anyway.
Yeah.
And then we talked about logistics and shipping and distribution across the world. Really hard to deal with that. Everyone's succumbed to that across the board, no matter what industry you're in, whether you're in, you're shipping TVs or cars. That's just something you're going to have to live with. Yeah, you're definitely going to have to live with that. So if anything, as a consumer, maybe try and drink coffee from a more local region like Australia. We could be drinking more from Indonesia or Papua New Guinea. That would, and there's coffee in Australia. You can also do that.
India, Vietnam, China, try it all.
Yeah, try it all. Exactly, try it all. And then in terms of the future of coffee and what we're looking at, it's largely going to be dictated by you and your decisions and your consumer behavior as well as a whole, because of all those things that go into it. So I think the next step for us would be to talk about the seed market itself in more detail, Ollie. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, that absolutely sits with me. I'm very comfortable to do that, and I think, hopefully opening up a little bit of that genie in the bottle will again help people understand how it all works and how it fits together. So it'll be my pleasure to come back and talk more.
Oh, amazing! Thank you so much, Ollie. I really appreciate that, and I think Liam and I are both a lot smarter from today.
Agreed.
I think we got a better understanding and a better handle on things, and I hope you as a listener did as well. If anybody wants to learn more or has more, more relevant insights and also more questions about any of the things we touched on today, please reach out to us via email so we can ask Ollie directly, or you could email him directly yourself. But I'd rather go to public fodder like this so that everyone gets the education together, because I think the more we all know about it, the better we can treat the product that we love with more care and more understanding.
If you want to email us, guys, just email us at hello@itsjustcoffeepod.com. And Ollie, do you have any resources that you would kind of recommend people to get across, just on a kind of broad scale as well?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I think for fun, just to start, again, particularly if we're going to really hone in on the C market and what it is and how it works, the mechanisms, start there. And I suggest a very good website called Bar Chart. It's what we use as a background informer of where the market price is. It's fascinating because it doesn't just show you the C market, but you see how many other commodities there are being traded at any one time. Cocoa, orange juice, steel, gold, it's all there, and the currencies. I think that's a really... Just start opening up every day and seeing the difference, and how volatile coffee really is. You can have a look at that.
Yeah, and volatile cocoa is as well at the moment. That's going nuts.
Absolutely. So, check that out. That's an easy start, and not too scary in the info it has either. It's relatively, it's for the layman.
Perfect. It's for us.
Yeah.
Awesome. And as always, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Ollie, for coming on. And as always, Liam.
Thanks, guys.
It's just coffee.
It's just coffee.
Absolutely. Rock and roll.
Thanks, guys.
Ollie, that was unbelievable, man. Thank you so much. That was so easy to understand. And I think there's a nice linear progress to it. And, talking about the C market next time is just going to be such a pleasure. Now that we know that we know why there's all these other different things that are impacting it, and hopefully, my ultimate goal would be, even if there's like 200, 100, even 50 people that follow the journey from start to finish of you coming on and talking about all this stuff, that'd make me so happy.